instance, to South Africa?
Yeah, he came in 1952, and I was just 1 year old at that point. And he came out to, he was part of a team of 25 German technicians who were contracted to build the first Sasol power station in Sasolburg, which became later known as Sasolburg. At that time it was just a piece of filth. And then my mom and I arrived 6 months later, and as I've often subsequently thought, she never really recovered from the experience of landing in Africa in the middle of the Free State in a barren piece of veldt. Yeah, that was it. That's how I got introduced to Africa. So, yeah, I think in our home there was some emphasis on music. My mom was a lover of both classical and jazz, and my dad was also a jazz listener. So there was music in the home, but it came upon me quite from left of center, in that I came across an old guitar lying at a friend's home. Beautiful instrument, actually. It was a lovely blonde acoustic steel string guitar, and I kind of fell in love with the idea of this instrument, this thing that you could make music on. And they very generously gave the guitar to me, so I took it home and I started fiddling with it, completely without any kind of reference to how you should do it. But I worked out that if you tuned the strings in this way that you could do that boogie woogie. So the relationship between the strings was evident to me from that little riff. I realized, especially when you then needed to go. So these two strings here had to be in that relationship, and then I just assumed that the next one would also be in that relationship, and so all the way through. The mistake I made was that I tuned this second thinnest one here, referred to as the B string. I actually had that in C, and then this one up here, which should be E, was in F. So the guitar was actually wrongly tuned. And my next step was that a school friend of mine, Asher Klavansky, who then subsequently became my mentor and musical partner, he put me right. So he said, no, you can't have that string tuned there. It needs to be down to B, and this one needs to be in E. And then I could form chords. And then from there on, I moved forward musically. Asher and I went on to do a lot of Simon and Garfunkel and folk stuff, which I think to this very day, I'll never forget it, because it just gave me the foundation for my love of acoustic folk music. Yeah, Umoya was a song which was born in the early 90s, at the time when South Africa underwent its change, big political change. And we, quite coincidentally, got to meet one of the serious players, one of the revolutionaries or comrades or struggle vets who became a minister, became a connection because of work. I was involved in a business that dealt with that particular ministry, and so we got to know him through work, but that then led on to a social connection, because he and his wife got on well with the two of us, Lynn and I, and we spent a night at the Green Dolphin, because he was a jazz lover, they were jazz lovers. And during the course of that evening, as we were getting to know each other better, she said, she made this statement, there was a time when we weren't white enough, and now we find that we're not black enough. And I said, wow, that's quite a thought, and what a good idea for a song. So the song initially was called Not White Enough, or Not Black Enough. It was actually either or. And how it became known as Umoya was that the one line of the song, You're Still Blowing in the Wind, which is not the Bob Dylan line, but it's a line out of a book, which refers to the fact that you can't get away from the pressure of your particular environment. And I just thought that he depicted that very well. He was still blowing in the wind, and he was never really able to be wholly himself, because the himself that he was compromised by very rigid principles, and he stuck to his principles, whereas in fact in this world, to get on, we have to blow with the wind. In other words, we have to bend according to what is expedient. So that's, and then the wind, I asked a friend of ours, Patricia, who's Xhosa, I said, how do you say wind in Xhosa? She said, umoya. And I said, okay, that's a cool name for a song. Yeah, so this guitar I'm sitting with right here is my newest Lakewood. I'm a deeply convinced Lakewood player. Lakewood guitars are made in Germany in a small lutherie. They have about 18 highly skilled woodworking luthiers, and I got to know them some 10 years ago, and ever since then I've been playing Lakewood guitars. And I have a number, and I've owned numerous Lakewoods which have come and gone, and I now have 5 of them in my quiver, as it were. This particular one is the most recent. It's a cedar top guitar, so you can see that beautiful rich, we call it cappuccino. It's got like a cappuccino feel and look to it, doesn't it? It's just gorgeous rich tones of wood, and not a lot of varnish on this guitar, because I believe that varnish impedes the sound somehow. So it's got two very thin coats of varnish on. And notably, this guitar has 13 frets to the body. So usually, that, by the way, is the 12th fret. Usually the body joins at that fret, but this one joins here, which makes the guitar a bit shorter. And the scale length is also shorter, and the birds obviously approve, as you can hear gorgeously. And the scale length is 630 millimeters rather than 650, which makes the strings a little slacker, so you can do that very easy. So it's a beautiful guitar because of its 13 fret characteristic. It's a rosewood back and sides, as I said, cedar top. That's ebony wood over there, as is this. Those are ivory pins, which make it quite sibilant. You'd be surprised how if you change those to wooden, it acquires another tone. I love it. So that's the riff for White Lady, which is called a Travis pick. So it's quite rhythmic, even though it's not very energetic. It still has a rhythm to it, and it's the riff for White Lady. A White Lady is a ship which resides here in Simon's Bay, owned by the Navy. It's a hospital ship, and I was cycling down in Simonstown when I wanted to go into the docks to see this particular vessel up close, and I asked the guy at the gate, and he said, yeah, that's the White Lady, it's the SAS Protea. And I was able to have a look at it. It's a very romantic looking vessel. Looks like the kind of thing you would convert into a personal yacht if you could afford it. Anyway, this vessel came and went kind of in sync with a particular development of one of our children who was going through some difficult times, and it just seemed that as something else in his life evolved, so the ship would either be leaving or coming back. It was almost unsettling in a way. Anyway, so it led to this particular song, White Lady. He keeps his options open like a can of gasoline. Intentions all forgotten, caution to the wind. Today he is invincible, tomorrow may never come. He can never walk the talk when he's on the run. If you hear him fall, please take the call. Save our soul. Yeah, Memories of Rain was made about 5 or 6 years after Leave Your Light On, which we recorded in our home in Newlands in Raisbury Close, a very beautiful old Victorian house which lent itself admirably to a studio, and we produced that album there. It was done by Johnny Blundell, and it used bass and drums and some additional vocals, but obviously an acoustic guitar driven album. And then, as one does, you very quickly, as you're making the one album, you find that you already have 2 or 3 or 5 songs in the making, and you never quite know where the cutoff point was or is. And I built up a quiver of additional songs which needed to be recorded. And Johnny invited me, with the assistance of his company Rootspring, to make an album, and they made it possible. They provided the funding to hire in the relevant musicians, and so we made Memories of Rain again in a house which we sequestered for the purpose of making the album. And we had James Van Minnen on drums and Bryden Bolton on upright bass, double bass, which is flipping awesome. Mark Fransman on accordion, Nonzi Galada on backing vocals with Tonya Selly as well. And we put together an album which I have to say I'm absolutely delighted with how it's come out. It was mixed and mastered by Robin Walsh, who did a superb job, and it makes the album speak uniformly, even though it has 13 very, very different tracks with very different genres on it. Nonetheless, the album comes across as it's coherent. All the tracks seem somehow to reside well together. Yeah, I'm very happy to have had the opportunity of doing that. I can recall vividly a trip that I did when I was a kid. I was only 19 years of age or so, and I did a trip to Lorenzo Marx, which is today known as Maputo, of course, and I drove there in a VW 1100, I think it was. May have been 1200, but I think it was an 1100cc VW Beetle, and a pretty old one at that. And I was towing my Finn dinghy sailing boat to the Fin de Oro regatta in Lorenzo Marx. And I left at 3 o'clock in the morning to kind of get out, to make a good start. And I hadn't really gone further than 10 k's from home when I was left with a gear shift in my hand. So the gear knob had physically come out of the transmission channel, and the car was stuck in second gear. I was able to turn around and go back home, and woke up my dad, who was never flummoxed by any of this kind of stuff. And I said to him, look, the car, is injured. It doesn't have a gear lever. And he said, well, let's go back to sleep. We'll sort it out in the morning. So early that same morning, we got up, and my dad made a repair with wire, with blow drought, as we refer to it, and was able to reconnect the linkage so that the gear shift once again worked. And I was on my way, and this time there were no further mishaps, and I got to LM, as it was known, Club Naval and pitched my tent and got my fin together and participated in the regatta. And in those days, remember, there were no cell phones, there was no email, there was no electronic communication at all. And it would have been unheard of to make a phone call back home. So my folks must have wondered how, whether I'd even got there. Anyway, as I subsequently learned, they knew that I had got there because in the newspaper, the results of the first race of the Fin de Oro had been reported, and they reported the first 10 positions of the first race, and I came 10th, so they could obviously deduce that I had made it there.